Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. On this episode, we will take questions on gardening. These questions were sent to me by my followers on Facebook and Instagram. Let's start. The first question is, how do I start? How do I start a garden? Actually, to start a garden, you first of all have to find a space, some soil and some seeds. I always advise you to start small. Start with one container with a few seedlings, maybe kales or herbs. Herbs are actually very easy because most of them are disease resistant. So you find some soil and you find a container and you put your seedlings there, water them twice a day or once a day depending on your area, and you are started. You take it slow and keep learning while you're growing. I think that's the best way and easiest way to start a garden. The second question was most asked by many people was, where do I find good seedlings? Where do I find good seeds? And my advice would be, find the farmers next to you, find the farmers in your area and find out what they grow, because the seeds I grow in my area are the seeds that do well in my area. And once you've done that and known what farmers in your area grow, then you can find seeds in the agrovet or in the supermarkets. You can also find seeds from the farmers, find out where they get their seedlings. Or there are farmers who start seedlings and sell seedlings alone. You can also buy seedlings from them. You can also buy seedlings from us. We do sell seedlings, and I'll leave a link to our Facebook page on the description box, and that's where you can get some of the seeds. The next question is, when do I plant? When do I plant my garden? And this depends on your seasons. Here in Kenya, mostly we have 2 seasons of planting. That is if your garden is rain fed. If you're doing agriculture that is fed, if you're doing irrigation, then you don't really need to depend on season and you can plant anytime. However, there are plants that do well in the rainy season and there are plants that do well in certain seasons. Especially tomatoes, they will do well in the hot season. So do not plant tomatoes when it's cold and when it's rainy. They may not do very well if you're planting them in the open garden. The rains in Kenya will be the short rains, which come from mid-October to November, and the long rains, which will come from end of February, March, mid-March, all the way to May. And that's when I tend to plant the biggest chunk of my garden. The garden that is dying now, I planted it in March, and it's still going because the rains this year have been doing so well. So determine your season, determine when the rains start, and plant that time. Herbs actually do very well during the rains, and I always advise that you start your herbs during the rainy season. That's the best time to plant. So the next question was, I'm a lazy farmer. How do I garden? So I have 3 tips which I'm going to demonstrate how to raise a lazy farmer's garden. So I have a container here and a bottle and some grass. So the first tip, if you don't really like to garden and you don't really like to touch a lot of soil, find a container like this one, put some soil and some manure. Plant your crops and use a bottle like this bottle. This is just a bottle I recycled. You fill it with water and you put it at the root of your crop like that. Now, this is like drip irrigation. You don't need to water this garden every day until this water is over. This water waters the plants. You can actually leave it alone for the whole week or until the water is out. So the next tip is to mulch your garden. If your garden is somewhere where it's receiving sun, which I actually recommend, use some grass and mulch your plants. Make sure you cover all the soil completely, cover the soil at the roots of the plants. This will help the soil to retain the water, and also it keeps the plants clean. No weeds grow, so you don't need a lot of tending in such a setup. So those are 3 tips you can use to start off a lazy farmer's garden. The next question was pesticides. If I want to keep an organic garden, how do I deal with pesticides? And actually, plants are like, they are living beings. And I actually believe that the condition of your soil determines how well your plants survive. So the first thing to look at if you're trying to grow an organic garden is healthy soil. Make sure that your soil is healthy, it's full of organic matter, it's well watered and well drained. That way your plants get the nutrients they require at the right time and they're able to fight off some diseases and some pests. Just like humans, when plants are stressed, they produce some scent which attracts pests which come with diseases. So if you make sure that your plants are healthy, they are well fed and they are well watered, that reduces the chances of your plants getting pests. Point number 2 is make sure that you check your plants. An organic garden requires commitment. So you have to check your plants quite often to find out if there are new pests coming into your plants. Some of them you pick them and others will require interventions. So some of the interventions that you can use at home are pick the pests, that's one. 2, you can make some homemade remedies. One of them is spray your plants, especially the leafy vegetables, with soap solution. So you make 2 liters of water with like 3 tablespoons of kitchen dishwashing soap. You mix that well and spray on your leaves. But before you spray all your plants, always do test spray. You spray 1 leaf and leave it for 24 hours to see if it affects it. So the next solution that you can use is baking soda and ash. You can use the wood ash. If you have a jiko, you sprinkle that ash on your leaves and that helps with the soft-bodied insects like aphids and mites. That is helpful. The other tip is to intercrop. Practice companion planting. If you're planting tomatoes, intercrop them with marigolds, basil, fennel. Those crops produce scents that repel the insects, and that helps your crops to grow faster. Especially marigolds produce a substance that kills nematodes. Nematodes are lethal to tomatoes. So if you put marigolds next to your tomatoes, you give them a better fighting chance. Plants of the onion family, garlic, chives, leeks, spring onions also work well to repel insects. So you can plant them inside your sukuma wiki, your spinach, your tomatoes, and even your beans. That helps a lot. If you're growing eggplant, beans is a good companion plant for eggplant. So you plant your eggplants and your beans together. That helps them fight better. The last and one of the very effective home solutions to pests is neem oil. So you make a neem oil spray. That's what we've used for our tomatoes mostly, and it really works on most of the pests. So you spray your neem oil on the plants, and you first of all test spray, and then you spray all the plants. We used to spray them every Friday, and that has really helped our tomatoes to survive. Sometimes you'll not be able to control pests, and that's fine. Do not be discouraged or frustrated. That's the nature of organic gardening. Some will die to keep the ecosystem going. Some plants will die, others will survive, and that's the best way. The last question I was asked is, how do I feed my plants? So if you're doing container gardening, always realize that your plants do not have options. They do not have anywhere else where they can get their nutrients from, as opposed to someone who is gardening on the ground. So if you're doing container gardening, you have to constantly keep feeding your plants. So you usually feed them 2 weeks or 1 week, depending on what kind of crop you're planting. Some crops are heavy eaters, like tomatoes. They are very heavy feeders. We feed them every Friday. Spinach, sukuma wiki, broccoli, the leafy vegetables are not as heavy eaters as the ones that produce fruit. So those ones you don't have to feed them as often, but you still have to feed them. So there are ways that I feed mine, and the first way to feed your crops is to make sure that your soil has enough manure, enough organic manure, which is readily available. And to make sure that your manure is readily available, you have to let it rot for at least 6 months. So when you collect your compost, it rots for at least 6 months and you use it. You use it in your containers. The next way to feed your crops is to use an organic feed, which you can prepare by, I see people blending eggshells, banana peels, and coffee. That's also a good feed. It's a good feed for your flowering plants because it contains some nitrogen, some potassium, and some NPK, phosphorus. Yes, that helps in the flowering. My favorite way to feed my plants is using manure tea. I make a liquid that I call manure tea, and I will show you how we do that. So this is how I make manure tea, which is my favorite feed for my plants. So in this setup, I have 2 buckets. There's this one, the one on top. This one has holes at the bottom, and inside this bucket there is manure, which is now rotting. Doesn't smell good, but that's how it is. So we put manure in this upper bucket. We usually prefer to put rabbit manure inside here. We add water, we let it ferment, and then when we are ready to feed, we just pull this one out, and we have manure tea inside here. That liquid inside there, we put it in a watering can like this one, and that's what we use to feed our crops. We feed our crops at least once or twice a week. The last way you can make feeds for your plants is to practice vermicomposting. Vermicomposting is where you use worms to eat your kitchen leftovers, garden leftovers, and the worms produce some black substance, which is actually, it's called worm castings, and you use worm castings to feed your plants. It's a very rich manure. It's a very rich form of plant feed. It's actually called black gold because it's very potent. It contains all balanced nutrients. You can also use those worm castings to make tea, worm tea, which you can actually even spray on your plants. It helps with the pests and the diseases. Yeah, I think that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you will try some of these methods and give me feedback. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe. Always remember that if you have a vision, add some passion. Goodbye.